for the Style Council in the past that you have been pigeonholed, that you're trying to say, you know, that there are various different influences or what have you that are at work, but people just, you know, because of the way you present it, people are just seeing you in one dimensional.
Yeah, I guess that we're not the only people that get that. I mean, everyone's kind of pigeonholed to a certain extent, but it is a little bit more complex with us. It's not to say that we're clever, but we do try and cover a lot of different areas. So we're not making it that simple, you know. It's not. It's not that simple. So it is easier to be misinterpreted, I think.
Moving on to the next track, which is "The Little Boy in the Castle," which you wrote, Michael. You seem to specialise in instrumentals as such. Do you ever write lyrics?
I do sometimes.
And what happens to them?
Well, eventually the toilets get cleaned, you know. I don't think it's one of my strengths. I've tried to write lyrics in the past and I think they resemble Spike Milligan's silly verse or things like that.
Yeah.
They're more akin to Lear than Lenin or Lennon or anyone like that. So, but I quite enjoy trying to put instrumental music into a pop format. And I'm fairly interested in soundtrack things, and when I first played music, I played some classical things, and it was only for a little while, but it must sort of influence you to a certain extent. And I think that's what, you know, like, I'm really pleased that we called that side the piano paintings, because that track is really like a painting to me. It's like I can imagine it in my head, sort of thing. So,
the closest you ever done to it, I suppose, would have been laid apart from the...
Yeah, that's kind of like an earlier sort of incarnation of it. And it's like all of the first side, a lot of people have been a bit bemused or puzzled by it. But to me, you know, things like The Depart and A Stone's Throw Away with String Quartet, they're all like, you know,
do you think
bridges to where we've got, sort of thing,
right.
and it's fairly obvious to me, but the fact that we've done a whole side in that kind of vein, I suppose, is just it's a bit of a shock to people at first, I guess.
Yeah. How do you feel about that? Do you think that the audience that you've got will take to what you've done on that first side naturally? Do you think they'll be bemused by it? Do you think they'll resist it? How do you think that they'll... Or is it impossible to say?
It's hard to say. I don't know. I think it'd be easier for people that know our work to get into the other side.
Yeah.
But I think that the first side bears repeated listenings anyway, and it, you know, I think it's just quite classic, you know.
What sort of reaction have you had so far from it? I mean, to that first side.
Everyone we've come in contact with who's heard the LP have all really liked that first side, liked it in fact more than the stuff on the other side. So whether that's a good indicator for what everyone else will feel, you know, but you can't tell. I mean, it'd be nice to think that people are ready to hear something different and, you know, be a bit more kind of open-minded about things. But you can't tell. I think it'll be harder in this country than it will in the rest of the world.
Why is that?
Because people are more... They restrict themselves anyway. I mean, we live in a very restrictive society. In any case, that's part of our characteristic almost, you know. And I think, you know, people tend to do that with music. They either, if they like the Style Council, then they don't like someone else, or if they like, you know, so-and-so, they hate the Style Council. And it's all like that. It's kind of all very polarised, you know.
Yeah.
Whereas I think, generally speaking, in other countries, all the ones we've ever been to, people are either like music or they don't, and if they do, that's it. And their only criteria is if it's good music and it appeals to them, and that's it. They don't worry about what it's wrapped in or, you know.
Would you two be guilty of that crime of liking one thing and not liking another?
Yeah, I think we've been tribal.
Yep.
I mean...
Do you think that has a...
We are, but at the same time...
I think more when you're growing up. I think it's a thing of a certain age, but maybe people in Britain never grow up, I don't know. But I mean, it's not such a big deal in Europe to find someone who's going to, you know, who might be going to see a string quartet, and then they might see like communards later on in the week, or
Sure.
And they might go and see a Chekhov play the next week. It's not such a big deal.
Do you think that because of Britain's class system that's why people react in that way? E.g., that people have a resistance to the theatre, say, because it's perceived as a middle class
also,
activity,
it's too pretty expensive.
Yeah.
If you compare it to the cinema or something.
It's only the money classes that can afford to go to theatre, really, or people who are earning.
But I think
in terms of actual music, that they'd like a certain style of music because it's more pertained to their culture than, say, middle class culture or an upper class culture.
I don't think pop music has too many any particular class distinctions, really, or music in general. I don't think that always applies. I mean, I know you'll get supposedly, a kind of aspiring money classes buying Sade or Sting or something, the kind of coffee table
CD.
set, yeah. Which may be true, I don't know, but I'm sure there's just as many working class fans like Sade, or same thing applies to U2 or whatever,
Yeah.
So, I mean, that is one good thing about music. It does cut across a lot of barriers and distinctions when it's at its best, I think.
Yeah.
And as all art does, but I think pop's probably a little bit more accessible.
Moving on
maybe
to
other things.
Yeah, moving on to the Gardener of Eden. This is perhaps one of the longest songs that you've ever written, isn't it?
Yeah.
Was it important for you to have? You were talking earlier about diving. Were you saying that you couldn't have written it 5 years ago just from the point of technique?
Yeah.
Is that must apply surely to the Gardener of Eden as well?
Yeah, I think it applies to all the stuff on the new LP. I mean, all of what we're doing over all of the last 5 years and all of our lives is just all a question of it's a process of learning and trying to get better at what you do, and trying to find the right kind of balance of getting more technique, or at least more kind of technical knowledge of things, and also still keeping the feel as well, and without getting too introverted in a sort of muso way, or just playing for yourself or a few friends or something. There's always that danger, but if you can kind of see the balance and try and keep the equilibrium, then that's the ideal thing, really.
Tell us a bit about how your attraction to classical music. When did that begin?
Probably in the last sort of 6 years or so, something like that.
Really? That far back?
I think so, yeah.
And what sort of composers would you be?
I used to listen to some Mozart and Bach, and then I've sort of discovered a lot of the kind of turn of the century composers like Debussy and Satie and Fauré. And then they lead on to other people. Then you start finding out there were similar composers. So it's just one of those things.
Talking about the classical music, what was it that attracted you to it? What do you find in it? Is there things you find in there that you don't find in pop music, say?
Yeah, I think I admire the fact that someone can compose a piece and think of, maybe 10 different harmonies or 60 different instruments playing at the same time. They can hear that in their head. They can imagine how it's going to sound. And I admire the technical side of that. But aside from that, I just admire the melody in it. No, the melodic sort of sense that I admire. And in those kind of composers I'm talking about, you can hear, they still sound very contemporary. You can hear some jazz. I don't say jazz was influenced from that, but you can hear where jazz and that period of classical music collide almost,
Do you think that you'd ever reach that state? Where you'd be able to compose?
Where we collide with what?
Where you'd be able to compose, like for an orchestra?
I'd like to think I could, but it's very doubtful. I mean, the only way I'd be able to do it is through the advances of technology, where you can play a keyboard and it will write out the scores for you on a screen.
Computerised orchestration.
Whereas Mick, you see, because he went to grammar school, and public school after that, he can read music, can't you?
Yes, Pinocchio.
Little Telby.
Notice I've got the shorter nose out of the two of us as well.
It had been noted. Michael, do you think that you could ever become a composer as such?
I think I could become a composer as such. But I believe that we're still a pop group, and you know, we wouldn't call ourselves jazz and we wouldn't really call ourselves classical. They're just extreme influences at certain points.
Just like I wouldn't call myself Brian.
No.
No.
But it would suit you. But I just think like classical music is an extreme form of mood music, and it just really conveys that. And that's why, you know, I think some of the best film music is a clash of jazz and classical stuff, and that may have been a filter for us as well. Soundtracks, you know.
Talking about pop music, the second side is far more
Very smooth.
far more recognisable as the Style Council. One of the themes that pops up on the second side is Confessions. Two of the songs have got the title in, obviously. How do you feel about? How do you feel? The lyrics on the second side are quite personal. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, they are. But you know, I think all the lyrics are really on the LP. I don't know. Again, it's a thin line between writing what you've experienced or come into contact with, and being sort of fairly open or honest about it from that side, from the writing point of view, or when it becomes too much like indulgence, when you're just kind of burdening people with, you know, your miseries or despairs or hopes or whatever. You know, it's always that very thin balance between things. So hopefully I've written them in although they are personal ones, I've written them in enough kind of there's enough kind of openness on them for people to put their own interpretations, just like we talked about before, you know. Without at the same time making them too ambiguous. I don't think they're that ambiguous, but well, there's a couple that are, but.
Well, why I went missing, I would say, is quite ambiguous. How
That's
about
one.
Life at Top People's Health Fund? Because that seems more impressionistic, more your views about Britain, as it were.
But in a kind of cartoon form, you know, it's almost, I don't know what it's kind of